Sometimes God hides things in plain sight, not because he wants to frustrate you, but because he wants to deepen you. Life has a way of teaching us that what looks random is rarely random. What looks like a detour is often a divine setup. What feels like confusion may just be the classroom where God is teaching you to see beyond the surface. And I know it can feel like you're standing in the middle of a puzzle with no picture on the box, no instructions, no clear idea of how the pieces fit. But God has a way of tucking treasures into places that look ordinary, into people who feel overlooked, into seasons that seem insignificant. And the mystery is never about the moment. It's about the message hidden inside the moment. The patterns of God are not always easy to trace. He doesn't leave straight lines for us to follow. He leaves breadcrumbs. And if you've ever felt like your journey was scattered, if you've ever wondered why your story couldn't just be neat and simple, let me remind you that hiddenness has always been part of God's plan. Some of his most powerful moves were concealed in places nobody was looking. A garden, a manger, a tomb. God takes what is hidden and uses it to change everything. And that's why you can't despise the parts of your life that don't make sense right now. You can't despise the questions, the unknowns, the moments where you're trying to figure out why here, why now, why me? Because what if the mystery is not a punishment, but a preparation? What if the silence is not God ignoring you, but God inviting you to look deeper? What if the confusion is really an introduction to clarity that's bigger than anything you've ever seen before? We live in a culture that wants instant answers, quick solutions, and easy definitions. But there are some things God doesn't want you to Google. He wants you to grow through. Some revelations don't come in seconds. They come through seasons. And when you look back over your life, you'll realize that what looked like chaos was actually choreography, that the steps you thought were wasted were actually ordered, that the patterns you couldn't see were the very ones shaping you for your destiny. I think about the moments when you wanted to quit, but something told you to keep going. That wasn't random. I think about the times you prayed for something and didn't get it, only to realize later that the no was the protection you needed. That wasn't random. I think about how the people who left your life made room for the people who would love you right. That wasn't random. These are the hidden patterns of God. They don't always reveal themselves when we want them to, but they always show themselves when we need them to. And the beauty of God's hiddenness is that he never hides things from you just to keep you in the dark. He hides them for you because they're too precious to be exposed too soon. Just like you wouldn't hand a diamond to a child who doesn't understand its value, God doesn't place revelation in immature hands. He allows mystery because mystery protects glory. Mystery makes you chase him, lean on him, trust him beyond your understanding. So if you feel like you're living in a mystery right now, don't let frustration rob you of faith. Don't let impatience push you out of position. Instead, ask God to show you the pattern. Ask him to give you the eyes to see the thread that's been running through your story all along. Because I promise you there's a pattern. It may not look like it, but there's a pattern. It may not feel like it, but there's a plan. And the deeper you go into the mystery, the more you realize that the answer was never about having every detail figured out. It was about trusting the one who holds every detail in his hand. The hidden patterns of God are never mistakes. They're masterpieces in progress. There are moments in scripture and in life where you catch a glimpse of something greater, something that feels too heavy to fully carry, but too clear to completely ignore. It's like a shadow that passes by, hinting at a reality that hasn't fully stepped into the light yet. And sometimes God allows those shadows to appear not to confuse us, but to stretch us. A shadow is proof that something solid exists, even if you can't see the thing casting it. And when God places a shadow in front of you, he's saying, there's more where this came from. Keep walking, keep pressing, keep believing. Shadows are important because they whisper that there's a kingdom beyond what your eyes can see. They remind us that heaven is closer than we think, That eternity isn't some far off dream, but a reality casting its image into our present. The shadow is not the fullness, but it's a sign that fullness is coming. And isn't that how God works? He gives us glimpses. He gives us fragments. He gives us little flashes of glory. So we'll have the faith to endure the parts we don't understand yet. I want you to think about how often life has given you shadows. You prayed for peace, and maybe you didn't get the whole package at once, but you felt a quiet moment in the middle of chaos. That was a shadow. You prayed for joy, and maybe you're not walking in it every single day yet, but there was one laugh, one song, one moment where you felt light again. That was a shadow. You prayed for breakthrough, and maybe the walls aren't all down yet, but you saw one door crack open. That was a shadow. God uses shadows to remind us that his promises are alive, even when they're not fully in our hands yet. But let me be real, shadows can be frustrating too, because when you see just enough to know something greater exists, it can stir up longing, it can stir up hunger, it can even stir up questions. Why would God show me a glimpse and not give me the whole thing? Why would he let me taste it and then pull it back? And the answer is that shadows are not meant to disappoint you. They're meant to direct you. They're arrows pointing you toward what God has already prepared. If he let you see a shadow, that means the substance is real. The kingdom of God doesn't always reveal itself in the ways we expect. It doesn't come wrapped in gold crowns or loud parades. Sometimes it comes in peace that doesn't make sense. In righteousness that feels like a weight lifted off your chest, in moments where you know grace carried you through when your strength failed. That's the shadow of something greater. That's the whisper of eternity breaking into time. And you know what else? Shadows keep us humble. Because when all you have is a glimpse, you have to admit you don't have the whole picture. You have to lean into God to fill in the rest. Shadows make us dependent on him. They keep us from thinking we've arrived, from thinking we've mastered the mystery. They remind us that there's always more to God than we could ever put in a box, more to his plan than we could ever fit in our logic, more to his kingdom than we could ever capture in our words. So instead of being frustrated by the shadows in your life, start thanking God for them. Thank him that you got a glimpse, because that glimpse is proof you're on the right track. Thank him that you saw a fragment, because that fragment is a seed of the fullness to come. Thank him that he loved you enough not to leave you in the dark, but to let you see just enough to keep your hope alive. And I don't know who needs this reminder, but the shadow is not the end of your story. It's the beginning. The glimpse is not the limit of what God has for you. It's the invitation to walk further, dig deeper, and believe bigger. What you saw was not the ceiling. It was the doorway. What you caught a glimpse of was not just a tease. It was a promise in disguise. The shadow only means something greater is already on the way. There comes a moment when God steps into history in ways that disrupt what people thought they knew. He interrupts tradition. He shakes systems. He shows up in a way that doesn't fit the rules we made, the categories we created, or the titles we hand out. And that disruption is not rebellion, it's revelation. Because sometimes the very thing we've relied on to define God becomes the thing that limits how we see him. So he comes through in a way that doesn't follow the line we expected, just to remind us that he is bigger than our order, bigger than our understanding, bigger than the boundaries we've set. We live in a world that loves titles. We cling to them because they make us feel safe. We love systems because they make life predictable. We honor traditions because they tell us who belongs and who doesn't. But what happens when God raises up something that doesn't fit the box? What happens when he breathes on someone who doesn't carry the right last name, who didn't come through the right bloodline, who wasn't voted in, approved of, or stamped with a seal of tradition? What happens when God establishes his own order and it looks nothing like ours? That's when we get uncomfortable. That's when we start questioning, can this be real? Can this be right? Can this be God? Because we've confused tradition with truth. And when God doesn't follow our script, we struggle to see his signature. But hear me. God will not be confined to what people expect. He will not be reduced to what systems allow. He will not be trapped in what traditions control. He is sovereign enough to disrupt it all if it means revealing who he really is. And maybe that's why some of you have felt so out of place. Maybe that's why you've been wrestling with the tension of not fitting in, of not matching the mold, of not carrying the title people said you should have. You've been trying to find your seat at tables that were never built with you in mind. You've been trying to meet standards that God never wrote for you in the first place. And it's been frustrating because you don't look like the tradition. You don't sound like the tradition. You don't fit the tradition. But what if that's because you weren't called to maintain tradition? What if you were called to disrupt it? See, when God sets something in motion, it doesn't need human validation. It doesn't need paperwork or approval or applause. It just is. And when he decides to establish his order, he'll bypass the expected and elevate the unexpected. He'll use the overlooked. He'll position the disqualified. He'll choose the one that doesn't fit just to show the world that his authority is not limited to human approval. And that's not just about history. It's about you. Because there's a call on your life that may not line up with what people expect. There's a grace on your journey that may not make sense to those around you. There's an anointing on your spirit that might not match your background, your qualifications, or your RA Some. And people may question it. Systems may resist it. Traditions may reject it. But God doesn't need a committee to confirm what he already decreed over your life. The danger of tradition is that it can make us worship the structure more than the spirit. It can make us depend on the order more than the one who established order. And God will always break through when tradition starts to overshadow truth. He will always disrupt what keeps his people from seeing him clearly. Because his goal is never to keep us comfortable. It's to keep us connected. So if you feel the disruption in your life right now, don't panic. That shaking might just be God tearing down what no longer serves his plan. That uneasiness you feel might be heaven pulling you out of the box. That resistance you're facing might be the sign that you weren't built to blend in. You were built to stand out. And I want you to understand this. The disruption is not random. It's intentional. It's heaven's way of saying there is another order at work, one that cannot be traced by human lineage or controlled by human systems. It's a reminder that God's authority is not borrowed. It's eternal. When God disrupts tradition, he is revealing that his power is greater than our patterns. There are moments in life where you realize that heaven and earth are not as far apart as they seem. Sometimes God plants symbols right in front of us, not to decorate history, but to bridge it. It's his way of showing that what we touch, what we see, what we live through is connected to something far greater than we can measure. He leaves reminders in the earth that whisper of eternity. He places markers in our path that point past today and into forever. And if you're sensitive enough, if you're paying attention, you'll see that the ordinary often carries the fingerprints of the divine. Think about it. God has always used earthly things to reveal heavenly truths. A rainbow to speak of covenant, bread to speak of life, water to speak of cleansing, wine to speak of blood. He takes what we know and uses it to reveal what we can't yet grasp. Because sometimes we can't handle the fullness of heaven, but we can handle the reflection of it. Sometimes the only way we can understand eternal realities is if God wraps them in symbols we can touch. That's why you can't take your moments for granted. That's why you can't brush off what seems small, what feels random, what looks ordinary. Because God hides heaven inside of earth. He hides his power inside of weakness. He hides his eternal plan inside of temporary situations. And the challenge for us is to recognize that when something looks simple, it might actually be sacred. When something feels common, it might actually be carrying a kingdom clue. You've seen it in your own life. That conversation you had that seemed casual, but it shifted something in your spirit. That was a bridge. That door that opened when every other one stayed shut. That was a bridge. That season that broke you, but also birthed something in you. That was a bridge. Heaven connected with earth. And even though you couldn't explain it in words, you knew it wasn't random. You knew it wasn't just coincidence. It was God letting you touch something that carried eternity in it. And I don't know about you, but I've learned to thank him for those bridges. Because when you're walking through pain, it's easy to feel like heaven is silent. When you're waiting for breakthrough, it's easy to feel like God is far away. But every now and then, he lets a bridge appear. He lets you feel peace that doesn't make sense. He lets you see hope in places that looked hopeless. He lets you experience joy that couldn't possibly come from the circumstance you're in. That's heaven breaking into earth, reminding you that you are never as alone as you think. Sometimes the bridge isn't for now, it's for the future. God lets you experience something today that will carry you tomorrow. He lets you see a symbol today that will make sense years later. He lets you feel his presence in a way that you may not understand in the moment. But when you look back, you'll say, that was God holding me. That was God teaching me. That was God preparing me. Because the bridge is not just for comfort. It's for confirmation. Confirmation that his hand is on your life. Confirmation that his plan is unfolding. Confirmation that his kingdom is not just something you're waiting for, but something you're already walking in. And maybe that's the invitation for us right now to start recognizing the bridges, to start looking beyond the surface and asking, God, what are you showing me here? What are you teaching me through this? What part of heaven are you letting me see in this moment on earth? Because when you learn to see the bridge, you stop living like your life is disconnected. You stop living like your struggle is meaningless. You stop living like heaven is only a faraway dream. And you start realizing that heaven has already been leaving evidence around you all along. So don't miss the bridge. Don't miss the symbol. Don't miss the moment where eternity brushes up against your reality. Because when God builds a bridge, he's not just connecting earth to heaven. He's connecting you to him. The bridge reminds us that God is never out of reach. There are some things in life that come with an expiration date. Jobs run their course, seasons change, opportunities shift, and even people sometimes walk away. We're used to watching things expire. We're used to stamping temporary on almost everything we touch. But when it comes to the covenant of God, there is no expiration date. His promises do not spoil. His authority does not fade. His grace doesn't run out when we've run too far. And that's the tension we wrestle with, because everything else in our world feels fragile. But God keeps proving that his order is eternal. Human systems rise and fall. Leaders come and go. Titles are handed out and then stripped away. But when God establishes something, it carries the weight of forever. It doesn't bow to time. It doesn't weaken with age. It doesn't fade with culture. That's why you can't base your faith on temporary systems, because systems collapse. You can't base your hope on human authority, because human authority is limited. But when you anchor your life in what God establishes, you are connected to something that outlives time itself. And maybe that's what you need to be reminded of, because some of you have been living like your future is tied to someone else's permission. You've been living like your destiny can expire because of what they said or didn't say, what they gave or didn't give, what they opened or what they shut. But hear me, when God speaks over your life, no system has the power to cancel it. When God sets something in motion, no person can bring it to a stop. His authority doesn't retire when people do. His word doesn't fade when seasons shift. His grace doesn't dry up when your strength does. This is why you survived what should have taken you out. Because what covered you was not temporary. This is why doors opened that nobody thought you deserved. Because what favored you was not temporary. This is why you still have a fire in you even after walking through storms that tried to drown you. Because what sustained you was not temporary. You were carried by something that doesn't expire. And it's not just about survival. It's about inheritance. When God establishes something eternal, He's not just thinking about you. He's thinking about the generations that come after you. He's thinking about the legacy you'll leave, the seeds you'll plant, the prayers you'll pray that outlive your lifetime. Human authority can only reach so far, but divine authority stretches across generations. And when God calls it eternal, that means your children can walk in the overflow, your grandchildren can walk in the blessing, your lineage can be marked by something that time cannot erase. But let's be real, it doesn't always feel like that in the moment. When you're sitting in disappointment, when you're staring at closed doors, when you're crying over what left, it's hard to believe that God's promise hasn't expired. It's hard to believe that His word is still working when all the evidence says otherwise. And that's why faith matters here. Faith says, even when I don't see it, I believe it hasn't run out. Even when I can't trace it, I trust it hasn't expired. Even when I feel empty, I know His grace hasn't gone dry. Because here's the truth, what God establishes is never bound by your timeline. He doesn't retire promises just because they're taking longer than you thought. He doesn't withdraw His hand just because you stumbled more than you expected. He doesn't cancel His purpose just because others canceled their support. His authority does not depend on human approval, and His promise does not depend on perfect performance. What He begins, He finishes. What He speaks, He sustains. What He covers, He keeps. And I don't know who this is for, but you've been looking at your life like time has already disqualified you. You've been saying to yourself, it's too late, it's expired. My chance is gone. But the promise of God does not come with an expiration date. If He spoke it, it's still alive. If He declared it, it's still in motion. If He covered you, you are still covered. What God establishes has no expiration. There are some mysteries in life that are not meant to be solved. They're meant to be stepped into. We spend so much time trying to figure it all out, trying to connect every dot, answer every question, close every gap. But faith is not built on having all the answers. Faith is built on trusting the one who holds them. And that's where the mystery becomes an invitation. It's not about cracking a code or solving a riddle. It's about surrendering enough to walk into what doesn't make sense and still believe that God is there. When God allows mystery, He's not trying to confuse you. He's trying to call you. He's stretching your faith, pulling you into places you wouldn't step on your own. Because if you could understand everything, you wouldn't need faith. If you could explain everything, you wouldn't need trust. And if you could predict everything, you wouldn't need God. But the mystery keeps you leaning, keeps you seeking, keeps you dependent. And I know that's hard because we love control. We love certainty. We love the feeling of knowing what's next. But God doesn't build faith on control. He builds it on trust. He doesn't grow you by making you comfortable. He grows you by making you curious. And mystery is the soil where faith takes root. It's where you learn to keep walking even when the path isn't clear. It's where you learn to keep hoping even when the evidence looks empty. It's where you learn to keep believing even when you can't explain why. Maybe that's why some of you have been in the season you're in right now. You've been asking questions and hearing silence. You've been searching for clarity and finding more uncertainty. And it's frustrating because part of you feels like you should have the answers by now. But what if God is using this mystery to teach you how to walk without sight? What if He's showing you that you don't need every detail to take the next step? You just need to trust the one who already sees the whole map. The mystery isn't meant to paralyze you. It's meant to move you. It's meant to stretch you past the limits of logic and into the realm of faith. It's meant to pull you out of comfort zones and into kingdom spaces. Because the kingdom doesn't run on explanations, it runs on revelation. And revelation doesn't always show up with blueprints, it shows up with breadcrumbs, little moments of confirmation, little signs of his hand, little whispers of his presence. And if you can learn to walk with just that, you'll discover that faith is not about certainty, it's about surrender. Think about it. You wouldn't need courage if everything was clear. You wouldn't need hope if everything was certain. You wouldn't need prayer if everything was predictable. But it's the mystery that forces you to depend on God in a way that nothing else can. And when you step into it, when you stop demanding answers and start leaning on his presence, you begin to realize that what you thought was a riddle was actually a roadmap. Every unanswered question, every uncertain step, every foggy moment, it was all leading you deeper into trust. And here's the beauty, mystery never leaves you empty-handed. You may not get the clarity you wanted, but you'll come out with the faith you needed. You may not walk away with all the explanations, but you'll walk away with intimacy. You may not solve every puzzle, but you'll discover the God who holds every piece. That's the point of the mystery. It's not to make you smarter. It's to make you closer. So stop waiting until you have it all figured out to move. Stop telling yourself you'll believe once you understand. Stop holding back your obedience until you have all the details. Step into the mystery now. Step into it with shaky hands if you have to, with unanswered questions if you must, with tears still in your eyes if that's where you are. But step into it because God doesn't call you to certainty. He calls you to faith.